Cult NES Games. This is the Addams Family, developed by Ocean in 1991 to go alongside with the release of the movie. By all accounts, the Addams Family is not an easy game for a kid to play, or an adult for that matter, and I'm still surprised I wasn't turned off from all video games by this experience. From an outsider's perspective, I can understand that this doesn't look like anything special. Well, looks can be deceiving because there's a lot of clever things going on in here, and just give it a chance for a second. The game opens up with a slight nod to Castlevania, as Gomez Addams enters the gate to the Addams mansion. Gomez is on a quest to go rescue his family from their lawyer, who's holding all of them hostage in the Addams Family manor. And the only way you can win the game is by collecting all the individual Addams Family members, and then also $1 million, so you can go save Morticia. This game is structured like a very early survival horror game. That's right, the Addams Family was my first entry into the survival horror genre, one that I love dearly, and this is where it started. And the Addams Mansion is the perfect place for some survival horror gameplay. You got your cryptic puzzles, your item mixing, opening locked doors, and it has a pretty spooky atmosphere going for it. It's more complex than any licensed title has any right to be, and a tad ahead of its time. It's also difficult. It has a notorious reputation for punishing the player. There are plenty of segments that demand pixel-perfect jumping, doorways that can lead to an instant death, or the infamous rooftop level that sends players back to the beginning of the game if they're hit by a loose shingle. You better save up your things if you want to get good. There's a part where Grandmama needs 3 items to create a shrinking potion to then save Pugsley, who's stuck over here in this escape hatch. Once the items are found, Gomez can shrink Pugsley and fit him into his pocket, which he takes across a Loch Ness monster-filled river to then fit him in a keyhole that's locking the door to the family vault where Morticia is being held captive. The catch is, you need $1 million to weigh down this contraption to raise the door to the final boss. You have to have $1 million to beat the game. Now I can see how it would be frustrating to make it all the way out to the vault, only to be $100 short of opening it, which is what happened to me. But the game is filled with money and it's never in short supply. Hell, it even rains from the sky at one point. When you finally get the money, you face off against Uncle Fester and Tully. Fester just twitches around the room awkwardly. It doesn't look anything like him, and he's taken out in 3 head bonks. Tully also looks nothing like his movie counterpart. It looks like they just cloned Gomez and put him on some stairs and gave him some knives. Is he the Game Boy Gomez? Just lure him down the stairs, jump on his head a few times, and then the game's over. You save Morticia. The game abruptly ends at that point, and I felt like there was a couple of unresolved matters. For example, you never get to see the Morticia character portrait in the item menu. Also, in the mansion foyer, there's a locked door which no key in the game unlocks. You can't even shove Pugsley in there. I've researched this, and I've looked at every game fact and the cutting room floor, and the mystery of what's behind that door has never been uncovered. If anyone knows how to open it, please reach out to me. It's been something that's been bothering me for decades. Overall, Ocean did a great job with this game, when they could have just as easily phoned it in, as they've been known to do with many other licensed games on the NES. Most notably, the Game Boy version of the Addams Family, which they also developed, which is the worst Addams Family game in the Addams Family anthology. Out of all 3 Addams Family games on the NES, the Addams Family is by far my favorite, and if you're looking for a good adventure title that's only about an hour long, then check this one out. This game right here, Fester's Quest. This is just one of those games that a friend always had in their collection. Nobody knew how it got there or why, but we would always spend weekends taking turns trying to beat it. It became legendary in my friend circle at the time, because nobody knew anyone who had beaten it or even gotten to the first boss. This is one of those times where I would recommend not judging a game by its cover. What? I couldn't get over this artwork when I was a kid, and I'm still scratching my head wondering who thought this would be an appealing cover. I'd always have to flip the cartridge over because I didn't want to look at Fester's grotesque face. They gave Fester some lipstick, a fur coat, and a head spider. I just don't understand anything about this project or how it came to be. This is one of the most bizarre games to ever be dreamed up. This shit has been plaguing me for years. Who brained this into being? Who funded it? Why Uncle Fester? Why have him fight aliens? Why is it serviceable and kind of fun? This came out years before the 1991 movie, so it wasn't like Fester Adams was a relevant figure in popular culture at the time. I had to know more. So I did a little digging around and I found out the truth behind Fester's Quest. There's a website called VGArc.org that did an interview with Richard Robbins, the creator of Fester's Quest, and this is what they found out. The short story is, there was a man named Richard Robbins that had a dream about a game called Uncle Fester's Playhouse, which was like Pee-wee's Playhouse starring Jackie Coogan. He immediately started a phone relationship with the widow of Charles Addams, the creator of the Addams Family, by calling her up in France many times until she eventually agreed to the game's idea. Sunsoft, the developers and publishers of Fester's Quest, tried to talk him out of it because they had no idea what the Addams Family were and they didn't know how to make a game out of it, but he persisted and he sold them on the idea that Fester would make a brilliant game with ideas that had never been seen before in video games. The problem was the Japanese developers didn't know anything about the Addams Family, so when they would send him builds, he would then check them against the accuracy of Addams Family lore, correct them, and send the notes back until it culminated into the final game. The truth is stranger than fiction. As an Addams Family fanboy, credit where it's due, Robbins did a great job integrating Addams Family lore into gameplay mechanics brilliantly. For example, when he's in a dark area like a sewer, he just pops a light bulb into his mouth and it illuminates the entire field. They also incorporated things like pulling on a noose to summon Lurch, who then murders all the enemies on the field and runs away. Some things I'm a little fuzzy on, like, did Fester ever have a blunderbuss? I'm not sure, let me see. Also, did Fester ever have a Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest flaming whip in the TV shows or the comics? Did Fester Adams have a diet solely of hot dogs? Fester runs around shooting things with his blunderbuss. He can get gun upgrades, which are marked in the blue, or gun downgrades, which are marked by pink, which will set Fester back a level. He can upgrade his gun about 10 times. Some of these aliens take like 20 hits, so you'll want to get the best gun you can find. One of the best ways to grind for upgrades is just to find these slimes in the sewer and just keep on shooting them until you get everything you need. Before you can get to one of the boss fights, you have to go into one of these 3D isometric, think Phantasy Star dungeon crawling mazes. You can easily look up a guide to figure out how to navigate through them or draw your own maps. Either way, it's your time. I'm not going to tell you what to do with it. At the end of these mazes are generally boss fights, and they're humongous aliens that often shoot stuff at you. My best advice is to use some of the invincibility potions that thing gives you, and then just keep shooting them until you run out of potions, and then use the healing potions and keep shooting them until you run out of potions, and then if you haven't killed them by that time, then I don't know, you're screwed. Some of these fights are damn near impossible if you don't use the missiles. You just move back and forth, target an enemy, and fire. Usually you'll kill the boss before you run out of missiles. Even the last boss is kind of a joke. I don't even know why I thought this game was so hard. Overall, Fester's Quest isn't the best game in the world, and it is kind of a second-rate Blaster Master, but you know what? I fucking love Addams Family games. Check it out. Felix the Cat, based on the classic cartoon, and not that horrific fucking movie that I watched as a child.
Come on, jump! Why don't you throw me your bag first? Not so fast, Johnny. I got you.
Why did you make me watch this? I'm a fan of platformers, and especially platformers that have you star as a cat. This is not the only one in this video. There's not a lot to say about Felix the Cat other than it's a simple platformer made by the guys at Hudson, the guys who made Adventure Island, Wonder Boy. I'm a big fan of games that allow you to transform into something else. I don't know what kind of genre of game this is, but I like games wherever you can pick up things and turn into other things, because that's always fun. Mario Bros. 3 did it. Felix picks up a heart he can turn into a different object, about 3 different per level. His standard is a boxing glove on a spring that comes out of his bag. He can turn into a magician that shoots stars out all around him. He has a car that has a killer honk. And then finally he turns into this tank that shoots out living faces. These transformations change based on the type of level he's in. For example, he's at a water level and his bag turns into a dolphin. That's kind of cute. My personal favorite transformation is this giant cat head that also doubles as a submarine that spits out missiles. None of the levels really stand out. They're kind of like your standard video game developer starter pack. It's like, oh, I need a water level. You get water, ice, put them in space, put them in history, put them on the land. None of it's really original, but that's okay. It's serviceable. Each level has some hidden giant bags that act as warp pipes that Felix can climb into to get some extra milk. Oh yeah, the milk thing. Felix has to drink milk, otherwise he'll revert into his previous transformation stage until he's back at his lowest form. You want to keep Felix in his final form, that's when he's the most strongest. He has a higher power level and he can fight Frieza. Speaking of fights, the boss fights are some of the easiest on the NES. All of the enemies can be stun locked into submission. Just get a projectile weapon and sit at the other side of the stage and keep lobbing it at the enemies. Overall, the game's fairly easy, but it has some cheerful music, some fun transformations, and you got a cat protagonist, which gives it 3 extra points added to the score. It's a perfect 10. Friday the 13th has to be the most polarizing game on the NES. There's camps of people who absolutely hate it, say it's the worst game in the world, it's too hard, broken, impossible, it's nothing like the movie. And there's another cult audience that props this game up as one of the greatest horror games of all time. I'm kind of leaning in that camp. I just think this game is greatly misunderstood. For example, many people believe it was developed by LJN. They only published it. It was actually developed by Atlas. They put a lot of thought into this little game. You play as one of the camp counselors that all have different attributes. You'll mostly be sticking with Mark. You can explore pretty much everywhere in Camp Crystal Lake, go into almost every house, and then it goes into this 3D isometric, think old Phantasy Star dungeon crawler. This can get confusing because it takes every angle into account whenever you turn your character. But the more you play it, the more you get used to it, and it's not a big deal. There are plenty of different items, weapons, and clues for you to find. The goal is to defeat Jason a total of 3 times, and that's no easy feat. And yet, when Jason appears, it is random and a little spooky. This was my first taste of jump scares. Jason will straight up pop out of nowhere and then you hear the and then you've got to react to the situation. He's a lot easier to fight outside on the two-dimensional plane. You just spam him with a ton of attacks until he eventually runs away or you die. My best advice is try to avoid fighting him inside the house, otherwise you're going to square off against him in a punch-out style fight, which are a little bit challenging until you get the hang of them. You can dodge left and right to avoid his attacks, but it's still no easy feat. Occasionally the Jason alarm will go off, and then one of the camp counselors or a group of kids in the middle of the lake will be under attack by Jason. You've got about a minute to hike your way over there before they die. This is where you've got a choice to make. You can sacrifice one of the camp counselors that you probably wouldn't use, like George, or the children a few times to continue on with your objective of finding stronger weapons to fight Jason or grinding for some cures. This is a game all about snap decisions. You can't let up one bit and there's no room for mistakes. So if you find a key, you can go into a cave and find Jason's shack, where Pamela Voorhees' decapitated head rises up like some weird Medusa and starts swooping down at you. She'll always drop a really powerful weapon or her sweater, which gives you better defense against Jason. I learned a lot about this game from watching speedruns. The speedrunners have a method to getting the torch very early on in the game. There's a specific set of instructions that you have to follow, but once you do and you spawn the torch, the game's pretty much won. At that point, you can then spam Jason outside, and after each day, your health fills all the way back up, and then you can go chase him down and fight him again. Fight him outside, and you won't have any problems. Fight him inside, that's where your skills will get put to the test. It's a game that's gotten a bad rap for a very long time, but I think many people have grown to appreciate this title for what it is. If you're looking for something that's a little bit on the spooky side and challenging side, then you can't go wrong with Friday the 13th. I think this is one of the best horror games on the NES, and it's worth your time. The Guardian Legend is one of those games that I didn't discover until I was an adult, and a friend kept recommending me the game. He's like, you gotta play this. It's one of the best NES games to ever be released. So I popped it in. I played the first level where it's a really fast shoot 'em up. I was like, what is this? It's just absurdly too fast and there's no upgrades. I don't like this. And I shut it off. And then as I was going through my NES collection, I picked it up again and I was like, I'm gonna beat the first level and see if there's any hype beyond it. Oh my god. The Guardian Legend is easily one of the best NES games out there. So your spaceship transforms into an anime girl called the Guardian, and she has to infiltrate this planet called Naju, which is a giant planet filled with monsters that can infect people and cause a whole bunch of chaos, I guess. She receives a video message from the previous person who attempted to destroy the planet, but they failed and now they're dead. This person tells the Guardian that the only way to destroy the planet is to activate 10 devices, which will activate the self-destruct sequence, which will blow up the entire planet, and then humanity is saved, or something like that. So as you might have guessed, it's not just a shoot-'em-up game. It also has a bit of an adventure Blaster Master kind of feel, where it's top-down, you go around blasting a bunch of aliens, destroying blocks, and getting upgrades. This is a game all about the upgrades, and I love it. The Guardian wanders around each of the different areas, looking for various corridors that she can then fly into and destroy the boss within, which will either give her an upgrade or a key to progress to one of the other areas. She can upgrade things like her health bar, the strength of her bullets, her defense. She gets all these different sub-weapons that have 2 different upgrades to them. The game is just brimming with originality, and I love it. The Guardian Legend, much like Crystalis, requires you to keep upgrading yourself and your equipment in order to progress through some of these levels, because they do incrementally get harder the further you go along. Bosses take more damage and deal more damage with each new corridor, so you best be keeping your game up. The Guardian Legend is also host to its own form of cryptic puzzle solving, oftentimes trying to figure out what magic thing you need to do to open up the corridor. You can find clues from terminals lying around the map, and they'll give you the exact solution you need to progress further. Half the fun of the game is just roaming around exploring and blasting and shit with your guns. There's a currency in the game called chips. You can use chips to buy item upgrades from these blue guys over here, and if you max out your chips, your gun will be at its strongest, but it can downgrade if you use your chips to fire the sub-weapons. The game has this odd balance of when to use your chips and when not to. Typically, I save up all my chips for a boss fight. There's a lot of strategy in this little shoot-'em-up game because as you're flying around, enemies are flying and pummeling you and throwing all sorts of projectiles at you. It's damn near impossible not to get hit by things, so make sure that you're constantly looking for recovery items out on the field. I think the only major problem in the Guardian Legend is the amount of sprites they try and cram on the screen. It's impressive, but also technically not feasible to cram this many sprites on a screen without any problems in return. Oftentimes, I'm just firing blindly into the abyss and hoping that I've destroyed something so I can bring the frame limit back. The game is 5 hours long, which is quite a long length for a game that's also half of a shoot 'em up. A lot of the gameplay time comes from backtracking to the different areas and picking up upgrades and fighting bosses that you may have missed. If you're ever lost, just look for the blinking icons on the map and that'll tell you where to go. The Guardian Legend is one of those games I'm jealous I didn't get to play as a kid because you know what? I would have loved this game. I love Blaster Master, I love the Guardian Legend, and I think you might like it too. It has somewhat of a cult audience and people have been pining for this game to make a return someday. Hopefully that day isn't too far off. I know you're looking at this video right now and a lot of questions are running through your head like, was this guy raised by a single mother? The answer is yes, and that's why we're talking about this game. Out of all the Disney afternoon titles on the NES, Disney's The Little Mermaid is the one that gets rarely talked about, as it was greatly overshadowed by the likes of DuckTales and Rescue Rangers. Even that shitty Tailspin game was included on the 2017 release of the Disney Afternoon Collection, and for whatever reason, a decent game like The Little Mermaid was absent entirely. I smell something fishy going on under the sea, and it ain't this bitch. It's sexism. Also, where's Goof Troop? Once again, the story's based loosely on the movie, as Ariel can apparently talk as a human, and the whole reason for her journey is to save her underwater animal friends. Wasn't the deal between Ursula and Ariel that in exchange for Ariel's voice, she would then get turned into a human? So what did Ariel give her in the game, if not her voice? Perhaps it's better if we don't know. Ariel has a few different modes of attack. She uses a tail swipe to encase enemies in bubbles, and then she can then pick them up and launch them with her tail as projectiles. She can fire horizontally, vertically, and diagonally upwards, but not below her. Like a shoot 'em up, Ariel can upgrade her bubble powers. She finds treasure chests that contain either green or red pearls. The green ones extend the range of her bubbles, and the red ones upgrade the strength and holding power of the bubbles. The more powerful the bubbles, the bigger the enemies you can capture. I know this game looks fairly simple and shallow on the surface, but there's some cute little quirks to it that make it fun. For example, Ariel can use her tail to dig in the sand to find thingamabobs or a green shell. Green shells can be used as weapons or as keys to unlock treasure chests. There's also hidden rooms littered throughout the game that can be found on each level that provide you with an extra life. Not that you'll need them because the game's fairly easy. The boss fights are some of the most simple affairs around, especially if you've mastered the diagonal throw. Just hang back, bubble up a little guy, throw him at the big guy. This is a title that's designed for first-time gamers, and I can't fault it for being easy. And the only real crime committed by this game is the length, as there's only 5 real stages, with the 6th stage being a showdown with Ursula. When the game starts picking up momentum and introducing some challenge and more complexity, it abruptly ends. But with a runtime of only around 25 minutes, it's the kind of game that never wears out its welcome. Although short, it's still on par with the quality of the other Capcom-developed games from the era. Kind of game as a guy you play and you don't tell anyone else that you played it. Ghoul School, not to be confused with Scooby-Doo and the Ghoul School, or the cult movie Ghoul School.
They're coming!
This is a horror-themed Metroidvania-like action game for the NES. You play as Spike O'Hara on a mission to go save Stacy Pom-Pom from some cursed skull that possessed the school and spawned a bunch of monsters and aliens. When I first played this, I thought this was the coolest game in the world. I just enjoy it whenever they take contemporary settings and make them abnormal in some way. Everything about this game is bizarre and strange and doesn't make any sense, and to the outsider, it would be too confusing and not worth their time. For example, take a look at your weapons. You start off with a baseball bat, sounds normal enough. Then you get a rolled up wet towel, and sulfuric acid, and even sandwiches as a weapon. You're squaring off against big-eyed aliens, Frankenstein's monster jocks, Grim Reaper principals, giant skulls, hearts, spinal columns. This one has a little chef's hat, that's cute. I was reading an interview with the creator of this game, Scott Marshall, and I guess the original concept was to have the school filled up with ghouls, or the living dead, and instead of a health meter, Spike would catch gangrene until he eventually turned into a ghoul. They had a lot of ambitious plans for this title. They were going to have things like a real working timer, where the ghouls would come out of the classrooms and you would have to hide in the lockers and dodge them, and they wanted to design this game in a more cartoonish fashion to make it appealing to kids and then segue it into its own cartoon or other media. But due to the limitations of the NES console and the different design decisions between members of the team, this game got cut substantially and some ideas just never came to fruition. Even with all the concessions made, I think there's still a lot of potential in this game, and it's fun to explore all the little secrets and see what kind of monster and weapon you're gonna encounter. The downside is it's very easy to get lost considering the scale of this school. Oftentimes you'll wander around only to find that you don't have a particular set of sneakers, like the spring shoes to hop over boxes, or the suction cup shoes to stick to the walls to get over the acid pits or spikes. Or you might be missing a weapon to attack a boss to get past the area to grab another weapon that you need to progress further. So a lot of this game ends up sending you on backtracking trips until you figure out what you need to pass. And it's all about trial and error. This is the kind of game that captures its muse, a low-budget B-movie horror. Every year I go back once during Halloween and I just sit down and play through it because I truly enjoy Ghoul School, and I wish it would have gotten a cartoon or at least a sequel. It definitely had a lot of potential to grow. At the end of the game, you fight a giant alien, and you rescue Stacy Pom-Pom, and you're placed out of the Ghoul School into the friend zone. Tale as old as time. Rockin' Cats, also known by its Japanese title as New York Yankees. I'm gonna give that a minute to set in. New York Yankees. This is Willie, and he's on an adventure to save his cat girlfriend, Jill, from the crime lord bulldog, Muggsy, and his cute mafia of other dogs. I'm loving it. The stages in Rockin' Cats are presented in an episodic fashion, where Willie finds himself journeying across NYC, the Wild West, a carnival, the sky, and a hidden stage where it's a hodgepodge of all the levels you already played, followed by a boss rush until the end. Rockin' Cats has a semi-Bionic Commando style of gameplay, but it's much less restrictive in the movement. Willie uses his punch gun to grip onto ledges or other objects, which will spin him around until the player lets go, which will send Willie flying. This is a game about understanding the trajectory of Willie's movement as he's spinning on his punch gun. His punch gun has a variety of other uses. For example, you can hold the A button, which turns the punch glove into a catcher's mitt, which can catch certain objects and projectiles launched at Willie. And in some cases, he can even throw them back. Atlas soda to the face. There's also a home shopping channel where you can purchase different abilities for Willie. When I used to play this game as a kid, I used to ignore all these power-ups, and that's a big mistake because that makes rocking cats a whole lot harder. The most useful items you can buy here are the hover boots and the power punch. The hover boots give Willy some air control and allow him to glide for short distances, often to clear large gaps. There is some extremely tricky platforming later on in the game, and they're a must. The power punch gives Willy double damage and the ability to deflect certain projectiles and destroy just about everything in your path. The only downside about it is that you cannot grip onto objects while it's equipped, so you'll have to revert to your regular punch gun for those cases. There's also a game show channel where Willy can play basketball, roulette, or a pipe toss, which is just like a different form of basketball, to earn cash or extra lives. Some of these mini games are quite hard, the other ones are just a game of chance. Spend your money however you want, you're a big boy. I quite love all the different settings and bosses that Willy encounters. Some include dogs and fedoras, clown dogs, offensive stereotype dogs, and chicken dogs. Before you get to Muggsy, you have to face off against his muscle, Mr. Kong, who's by far the hardest fight in the game. The strategy is to stay planted under his legs and shoot him in the Kong dong 100 times. Avoid them falling bananas and you'll be fine. Then comes the final showdown with Muggsy, which honestly isn't too difficult since you have all of your upgrades readily available. Shoot him a bunch of times and he goes down quickly. Then, just as the credits play out and you're about to close the deal with Jill, Muggsy comes out of nowhere and challenges you to take on the EX levels. These levels remove all of Willy's upgrades, restricting him to just the punch gun and 3 lives. Let me tell ya, they require Ninja Gaiden levels of skills to handle all the tricky platforming and wall jumping. With enough precision jumping, you'll eventually get to the final showdown with Muggsy, who's significantly harder to fight without your upgrades. Just sock him a couple of times and then hop on these platforms to dodge him and his bullets. And you gotta be fast about it and don't let up. So what's your reward for beating these EX levels? The same exact ending. And the satisfaction of telling your friends online that you did it. I did it. It's a real shame that Rockin' Cats didn't ever get a follow-up, as it had a lot of potential to be a good little mascot-based franchise for Atlas. One that had a lot of neat mechanics and some great toe-tapping tunes to boot. In summation, pull Willy and smash. Wario Woods is one of my favorite puzzlers ever. I have to say it's one of the most technical and intense puzzle games around. Best way I can describe it, it's like a mixture of Tetris Attack with the grab and throw mechanics of Super Mario Bros. 2. Story goes, Wario is taking over the forest that's adjacent to the Mushroom Kingdom, and he casts a spell on all the woodland creatures and makes them go crazy. I guess in the extended Nintendo-verse timeline, Mario was too busy baking Yoshi cookies or something to do anything about it. So Toad steps up and heads out to the woods, which are now Wario's. Toad meets up with Wanda, a fairy that was a playable character in the Mario and Wario game for the Super Famicom, and if you haven't heard of it, you gotta say Buckethead. So I guess Wario Woods is a sidequel of sorts. Anyways, Toad and Wanda team up to murder all the woodland creatures that are possessed by Wario's spells with bombs. The object is to line up like creatures in a row, either vertically, horizontally, or diagonally, to then place a bomb of the same color to then destroy that line. If you line up 4 more together, a diamond will appear and you can blow it up to destroy all the creatures of the same color. What makes this different is that the player is in complete control of Toad instead of just moving around puzzle pieces. Toad can run up walls or stacks of creatures, and he can pick up creatures or bombs one at a time, or pick up entire columns and move them around the tree. It's a little more technical than most puzzle games you'll play, but once you get the hang of it, it becomes highly satisfying because of how frenetic the matches can get. Toad has a limited amount of time to clear all the creatures disappears from the screen before Wario shows up and starts ramming the tree to drop it down on him and crush him. There's a Wario timer that will slowly fill up if you're not getting lines quick enough. And you can get rid of Wario and Pidgeot by getting more lines to decrease his timer. Those are the fundamentals. Once you clear a stage, you collect some coins, which earns you continues. As you progress through the stages, the stacks grow higher, the pieces fall faster, and the monsters become more complex to defeat. For example, some enemies will take like 2 lines to defeat instead of 1, and then some can only be killed by getting diagonal lines. You get the drift. These little minute changes to the enemies impact your strategies for each stage, so you can't get too comfortable sticking to the same formula. Every 10 levels, you get a little cutscene where Wario shakes his fist and threatens Toad. Then it gets bigger. It gets real big. According to the story, Wario was always big because I guess there's 2 Warios. It was this midget Wario with the fucked up face, and then there's Big Purple over here. That's the real one. Got it? Why is he wearing purple? There's a lot of variety of modes to play. Type A is the basic line clearing Wario's Woods. Type B is my personal favorite mode, as it introduces boss fights. Every 10 levels, a boss is introduced, and these bosses are a true challenge. Each has their own set of powers that amp up the difficulty. For example, they'll mostly just teleport around the tree. If they land on you, they'll crush you and you'll die. They can also use magic to summon more creatures or destroy all the bombs on the field. So you have to think quickly and line up the bosses with the enemy lines to damage them. These bosses have a whole bunch of hearts, and like 1 line equals 1 heart, but the bigger the line, the more hearts you can take away. I love these fights, and they add a bit of spice to the challenge. There's also a versus mode and a puzzle mode that are fairly self-explanatory. I'd show off the versus mode, but no one wants to play with me anymore. Wario's Woods is one of the funnest puzzle games out there if you take the time to learn the controls. I don't think it gets enough love out there. I mean, like Tetris, Dr. Mario, and Hatris seems to get more love and attention than Wario's Woods, and that's just not fair. There was a sequel called Wario's Woods Again, but it was only released on the Satellaview in Japan, where it apparently found a cult audience that kept the game on the service until the year 2000. Personally, I'd love to see a modern update to Wario's Woods or an official release of the sequel on the Switch one day, but we all know dreams don't come true. Star Tropics is one of my favorite NES franchises of all time. The original Star Tropics will always be my favorite game on the NES. It was the first game I remember becoming obsessed with, and it's the reason I fell in love with video games. Star Tropics is about a young kid, Mike Jones, that sets out on a grand adventure while he's on vacation in Sea Island, going to visit his uncle, Dr. Jones. It was packed with humor, giant monsters, and some clever riddles thrown in that incorporated real-life elements. I love this series, and I didn't understand why it never became bigger, because honestly, I find it much more entertaining than Zelda, which many consider to be its direct muse. So when a sequel was announced out of nowhere late into the NES's life cycle, I lost my damn mind. I probably asked my mom if it was out yet once a day every day until it finally came out in 1994. Technically, it was the second to last game to be released on the NES, but it was the last NES exclusive game, and it just so happened to be a Western exclusive for a change, as it was never released in Japan. The Super Nintendo was already out and well into his life cycle, so no one seemed to notice when Zodas Revenge came out. Also, the naming convention didn't help matters much either. See, the official name is Zodas Revenge, and Star Tropics 2 is kind of like a tiny footnote in comparison. I've had a few friends that had loved Star Tropics growing up, but never knew it had a sequel and still didn't to this day, likely for that reason. I understand the choice to name it Zodas Revenge, as there is a larger focus on the battle between Zoda and the Argonians in the game, and there's technically only one stage that takes place in the tropics, so it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to name it Star Tropics, but it's Star Tropics 2! Lead first with the brand. Now, I'm a firm believer in the importance of names games and awareness. It's why nobody knows about my channel, Hikikomori Media. They don't know how to say it or spell it. That's why Zodas Revenge was destined to languish in obscurity forever, as its last official release and acknowledgement from Nintendo was on the Wii U's eShop, and then it was absent entirely from the NES Classic, despite Star Tropics 1 being on there. You have Star Tropics 1, why not Zodas Revenge? I doubt it was a matter of space, cause you can cram a lot into that box. Believe you me. Once again, Zodas Revenge follows the adventures of Mike Jones, now a teenager attending high school. Life has settled down a lot since his time on Sea Island, but not for long. His uncle, Dr. Jones, had found a strange cipher in the escape pod of this alien race known as the Argonians. They're the people that Mike rescued from the evil Zoda in the last game. Micah, the princess of the Argonians, communicates with Mike telepathically to tell Mike about a dream she had involving her father, Hirikon. Was it a cat I saw? Was it a rat I saw? Was it a cat I saw? Was it a rat I saw? Dr. Jones interprets this dream as the way to decrypt the cipher. Then they sing Papa Oo Mau Mau, and Mike gets sucked into the pages of the Oxford Wonderworld, where he gets wrapped up in an adventure beyond time and space. You can see why I love this. The game is self-aware enough to joke about how wacky and bizarre the story is, and the humor does give Zodas Revenge a lighthearted nature. Now, it's gonna sound like I'm bashing on a game that I supposedly love, but I am comparing it to the first one because it is a sequel, and you know, why shouldn't I? For a later NES title, it doesn't push the console's limits in any discernible way. The colors are a tad more bland in the design compared to its predecessor. It just doesn't have that vivid tropical feel of Sea Island, and that's sorely missed. Even Mike has black hair instead of brown, and he wears this goofy acid wash jean jacket, and he has stocky, broad Frankenstein shoulders. Zodas Revenge runs on an updated version of the Star Tropics engine, and I've heard complaints about the difficulty of this title because of the new 8-direction movement and jumping mechanics, replacing being locked down to an XY grid. Honestly, the new directional movement doesn't bother me at all, except for the lower degree of difficulty that the freedom of movement provides you in battle. Most times you can just aim at the enemies diagonally and take them out without ever having them run into you. You don't encounter any rooms that lead you to instant death pits. They removed many of the secret passages and the dungeons. The puzzles here are fairly basic and don't require too much abstract thinking. They've boiled things down to finding buttons to press or defeating all the enemies in a room to proceed. It's a bit more on the stupid side. The Star Tropics series was created by the director of the Punch-Out games, Ginyo Takeda. And there's a clear influence in the boss battles and overall design in the game, since the enemies are often larger than life and you have to square off against them in a front-facing manner and just pelt them relentlessly with all your hardest hitting attacks. The game isn't terribly long, as there's only 9 chapters and each area takes only about 30 minutes to beat if you know what you're doing. The saddest part is there's a smaller emphasis placed on talking to people around the world. In the first game, you got to know everyone and listen to their stories about Sea Island and listen to a couple of jokes here and there, and these elements are sorely lacking in Zodas Revenge. Yeah, you can talk to people, but it really has no overall significance on the plot. Feels like a lot of the writing was an afterthought. Zodas Revenge is often slapped with the edutainment label, since the game has Mike running into famous historical figures that help him along his way. Yeah, the historical accuracy is totally on point. Like, remember that time Cleopatra ordered a pizza that was being delivered by a guy riding a Koopa Troopa? Thanks for the good grade, Star Tropics. I don't know how to put this, but instead of focusing on the things people loved about the original Star Tropics, like the island setting, the mythical beasts, and funny cross-dressing scenarios, there's a bigger emphasis placed on the conflict between Zoda and the Argonians. Alien shit. It's alright, but I miss the voodoo and all the wild antics of the residents of Sea Island. Now, even though Zodas Revenge mostly takes place across different eras of time, there are some nice callbacks to the previous game. Even an entire segment where you revisit Sea Island and face off against against old foes, like the skeleton of the island serpent. Remember him? It just doesn't feel the same. Now, I know it sounds like I've been complaining about Star Tropics 2 the entire time, but I think it's a sad note to end the franchise on that had so much potential to grow into something much bigger. Star Tropics 2 is not a terrible game, and it's quite fun in some places. It just doesn't live up to the first one, and it was destined to fail due to the naming convention and for it being released so late into the NES's life cycle. Star Tropics is the first dead franchise I ever became aware of, and I've been pining all this time for a return to Sea Island.